Before I share my story, let me ask you, what would you do if the woman who married your son refused to let you hold your own grandchild, and you suspected the secret was bigger than anyone wanted to admit? I thought I was welcoming a new life into our family, but the day my daughter-in-law kept my arms empty, I realized I'd spent years hopping for a bond that was never truly there. This isn't just a story about pride or jealousy. It's about the moment you decide to stop being shut out and the courage it takes to bring the truth into the light, even if it means risking everything. So settle in, and if you've ever wondered what you'd do in my shoes, hit that subscribe button. Because what happened next changed not just my family, but the way I see myself forever. The day my daughter-in-law refused to let me hold my newborn grandson, I realized I'd spent my whole life waiting for a family that might never be mine. It started with a phone call, not the kind that comes in the middle of the night, but the kind that makes your heart leap with hope before you even answer. My son, Daniel, was on the other end, his voice bright, a little breathless. "Mom, it's a boy. Julia and the baby are both healthy. We're at the hospital now." I felt tears spring to my eyes, joy and relief flooding my chest. "Oh, Daniel, I'm so happy for you, for both of you. When can I come see him?" He hesitated just for a moment. "Julia's tired, maybe tomorrow. We'll let you know." I told myself it was nothing. Julia had always been private, a little distant, careful with her boundaries. I'd tried to respect that, tried to be the kind of mother-in-law who offered help but never pushed, who sent cards and casseroles but never showed up unannounced. I wanted to be welcome, not a burden. But as the hours passed, and the phone stayed silent, a familiar ache settled in my chest. The next day, I baked a batch of cinnamon rolls, Daniel's favorite, and drove to the hospital, my heart pounding. I stopped at the gift shop for a blue teddy bear, a card, a bouquet of wildflowers. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd smile, how I'd keep my visit short and sweet. When I arrived, Julia's mother was already there, sitting by the window, her arms full of balloons and gifts. She smiled at me, her eyes cool. "Congratulations, Anna," she said, her voice polite. "He's beautiful." I smiled, trying to ignore the way she looked me up and down, the way she shifted in her seat to block my view of the bassinet. Daniel hugged me, his eyes shining with pride and exhaustion. "Come meet your grandson, Mom." I stepped forward, my hands trembling, my heart full. But as I reached for the baby, Julia turned away, her voice sharp. "He's sleeping. Please don't touch him. The doctor said we shouldn't pass him around." I froze, my hands hovering in the air. I looked at Daniel, at Julia's mother, at the tiny bundle in Julia's arms. "I just wanted to hold him for a moment," I whispered. Julia shook her head, her eyes hard. "Not today, maybe later." I sat in the corner, watching as Julia's mother cooed over the baby, as Daniel hovered nearby, as Julia cradled her son, her body turned away from me. I tried to make conversation, to offer help, to share in the joy, but every word felt forced, every smile brittle. After an hour, I stood to leave, my arms empty, my heart aching. "Thank you for letting me visit," I said, my voice trembling. Julia nodded, her eyes never meeting mine. "Of course." Daniel hugged me at the door, his voice low. "She's just tired, Mom. Give her time." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I understand." But as I walked to my car, the ache in my chest grew sharper, deeper, harder to ignore. That night, I called Ruth, my sister, needing to hear her voice. She wouldn't let me hold him, Ruth, not even for a minute. Ruth was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm so sorry, Anna. That's not right. You're his grandmother." I wiped my eyes, my voice breaking. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe she's just tired. Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. Or maybe there's something else going on. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, text messages, and polite excuses. Julia sent photos of the baby, always alone, never with Daniel, never with me. Daniel called every night, his voice tired, his words careful. "Julia's still recovering. She needs space. The baby's fussy. Maybe next week." I tried to be patient, to respect their wishes, to believe that things would get better. but the ache in my chest grew heavier with every passing day. I started to notice little things. Julia's mother posted photos on social media, her holding the baby, her family gathered around, Daniel smiling in the background. I was never in the pictures. My name was never mentioned. At church, friends asked when I'd meet my grandson, when I'd get to babysit, when I'd host the first family dinner. I smiled, made excuses, changed the subject. But inside, I was unraveling. I tried to keep myself busy, to fill the empty hours with chores and small comforts. I baked bread, weeded the garden, called Ruth every evening just to hear a friendly voice. I told myself that Julia just needed time, that Daniel would speak up for me, that soon I'd be holding my grandson in my arms, rocking him to sleep the way I once rocked his father. But the ache in my chest grew heavier with every passing day. I found myself wandering through the nursery I'd set up in my own home, just in case they needed help, just in case they wanted to visit. The crib was still made up with soft blue sheets, the mobile still hung with tiny stars, the shelves lined with picture books and stuffed animals I'd saved from Daniel's childhood. I dusted the furniture, rearranged the toys, folded and refolded the tiny clothes. I imagined what it would be like to hold my grandson, to sing him lullabies, to watch him grow. I wondered if I'd ever get the chance. Daniel called every night, his voice tired, his words careful. Julia's still recovering, Mom. The baby's fussy. We're just trying to get into a routine. I tried to sound cheerful, to hide the hurt in my voice. Of course, sweetheart, take all the time you need. But I could hear the strain in his voice, the way he hesitated before hanging up, the way he always promised, maybe next week. I started to notice little things. Julia's mother posted photos on social media, her holding the baby, her family gathered around, Daniel smiling in the background. I was never in the pictures. My name was never mentioned. At church, friends asked when I'd meet my grandson, when I'd get to babysit, when I'd host the first family dinner. I smiled, made excuses, changed the subject. But inside, I was unraveling. One afternoon, I stopped by their house with a casserole, hopping for a glimpse of the baby, hopping for a chance to help. Julia answered the door, her hair pulled back, her eyes tired. "Oh, Anna, you didn't have to do that," she said, taking the dish from my hands. I smiled, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just wanted to help. I thought maybe I could hold the baby while you rested." She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "He's sleeping, and the doctor said we shouldn't have too many visitors, germs, you know." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Of course, maybe another time." She closed the door gently, leaving me standing on the porch, the ache in my chest sharper than ever. That night, I called Ruth, my voice trembling. "She won't let me see him, Ruth. She won't even let me in the house." Ruth was silent for a moment, then said, "Anna, this isn't right. You're his grandmother. You have a right to be part of his life." I wiped my eyes, my voice breaking. "I don't know what to do. I don't want to make things worse." Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. "Maybe it's time to stop waiting for an invitation. Maybe it's time to find out what's really going on." I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the ache in my chest growing heavier with every passing hour. I thought about Daniel, about the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and wild stories, about the man he'd become, about the family he'd built. I wondered if he remembered the promises we'd made, the dreams we'd shared, the love that had held us together through every storm. And I promised myself that, whatever happened next, I would not let myself be erased. The days blurred into weeks. I tried to keep my hope alive, telling myself that Julia would come around, that Daniel would remember who I was to him, that soon I'd be holding my grandson in my arms. But every time the phone rang, every time a car pulled into the driveway, my heart leapt, and then fell again when it was just Ruth, or a neighbor, or a deliveryman with another bouquet of flowers from church. I started to notice more and more that Julia's mother was always in the photos, always in the stories Daniel told. "Julia's mom is such a help," he'd say. "She's here every day, helping with the baby, making meals, keeping Julia company." I tried to be happy for them, but I couldn't help feeling like an outsider, like a guest in my own family. One Sunday, after church, Ruth and I sat on the porch, sipping tea, the sun warm on our faces. "Have you seen the baby yet?" she asked, her voice gentle. I shook my head, my eyes filling with tears. "Not once. Julia's mother is there every day, but I'm not allowed. I don't know what I did wrong." Ruth reached for my hand, squeezing it tight. "You didn't do anything wrong, Anna. This isn't about you. There's something else going on." I nodded, wiping my eyes. I just wish I knew what it was. That afternoon, I decided to try one more time. I baked a batch of cookies, Daniel's favorite, the ones he used to beg for when he was a boy. I drove to their house, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. Julia answered the door, her face tight, her eyes wary. "Hi, Anna," she said, her voice cool. "What brings you by?" I held out the cookies, forcing a smile. "I thought you might like a treat, and I was hoping maybe I could see the baby, just for a minute." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. I could hear the baby crying in the background, the sound sharp and insistent. "I'm sorry, Anna, he's fussy, and the doctor said." I cut her off, my voice trembling. "Julia, please, I just want to hold him just for a minute." She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Not today, maybe another time." She closed the door gently, leaving me standing on the porch, the cookies heavy in my hands, the ache in my chest sharper than ever. That night, I called Daniel, my voice shaking. "Daniel, I need to see my grandson. I need to know what's going on." He sighed, his voice tired. "Mom, Julia's just being careful. The baby's still so little. We don't want to risk anything." I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "But Julia's mother is there every day. She's holding him, feeding him, taking care of him. Why can't I?" He was silent for a moment, then said, "It's complicated, Mom. Please try to understand." I hung up, my heart breaking. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the ache in my chest growing heavier with every passing hour. I thought about Daniel, about the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and wild stories, about the man he'd become, about the family he'd built. I wondered if he remembered the promises we'd made, the dreams we'd shared, the love that had held us together through every storm. And I promised myself that, whatever happened next, I would not let myself be erased. The next week, I tried to distract myself with chores and small projects. I cleaned out the attic, sorted through old photo albums, and planted new roses in the garden. But nothing could fill the emptiness I felt. Every time I passed the nursery I'd prepared, my heart twisted. The crib was still made up, the mobile still hung with tiny stars, the shelves still lined with picture books and stuffed animals. I dusted the furniture, rearranged the toys, folded and refolded the tiny clothes, but it all felt pointless. Ruth came by every afternoon, bringing fresh bread or a casserole, her presence a comfort. We sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, talking about everything and nothing. "Have you heard from Daniel?" she asked one evening, her voice gentle. I shook my head, staring at my hands. "Not since I called. He's avoiding me. I can feel it." Ruth squeezed my hand. "You deserve better, Anna. You deserve to be part of your grandson's life." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "I just don't know what to do. I feel so helpless." One night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the house silent around me, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I thought about Julia, about the way she looked at me, the way she always seemed to be hiding something. I thought about Daniel, about the way he avoided my questions, the way he always seemed to be caught in the middle. I started to wonder if there was more to the story. I remembered the way Julia's mother always seemed so comfortable in their home, the way she took charge of everything, the way she posted photos of herself with the baby but never included me. I wondered if she knew something I didn't, if she was keeping a secret, if she was protecting Julia or protecting herself. The next day, I decided to do some digging. I started with social media, scrolling through Julia's mother's posts, looking for clues. I noticed that she never mentioned Daniel by name, never referred to him as the baby's father, never posted photos of the three of them together. It was always my daughter and the baby. Our little one. so grateful for family. I felt a chill run down my spine. I started to wonder if Daniel was really the baby's father. If there was a reason Julia was keeping me at arm's length, if there was a reason she didn't want me to hold my grandson. That afternoon, I called Ruth, my voice trembling. Ruth, what if the baby is Daniel? What if that's why Julia won't let me hold him? Ruth was silent for a moment, then said, Anna, you need to be sure. You need proof. You can't accuse her without evidence. I nodded, my heart pounding. I know, but how do I find out? Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. There's only one way, Anna. You need a DNA test. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the ache in my chest growing heavier with every passing hour. I thought about Daniel, about the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and wild stories, about the man he'd become, about the family he'd built. I wondered if he remembered the promises we'd made, the dreams we'd shared, the love that had held us together through every storm. And I promised myself that, whatever happened next, I would not let myself be erased. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote out a plan. I knew I couldn't just ask Julia for a DNA test. She'd never agree, and Daniel would be caught in the middle. I needed to be careful, to be smart, to protect myself and my family. I started by researching at-home DNA test kits. I read reviews, compared prices, learned how the process worked. I ordered a kit online, using a discreet shipping address, and waited anxiously for it to arrive. Every day, I checked the mailbox, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Ruth was my confidant, my sounding board, my anchor. She listened as I talked through my plan, her voice steady and supportive. You're doing the right thing, Anna, she said. You need to know the truth. Daniel needs to know the truth. I nodded, my hands shaking. I just hope I'm wrong. I hope the baby is his. I hope this is all a misunderstanding. Ruth squeezed my hand. But if you're right, you'll have saved him from a lifetime of lies. The kit arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I opened the box with trembling hands, reading the instructions over and over until I was sure I understood every step. I knew I'd need a sample from the baby and from Daniel. I thought about how to get them, how to ask, how to explain, how to keep Julia from finding out. That weekend, Daniel called, his voice tired but hopeful. Mom, we're having a little party for the baby's 1-month birthday. Julia's mother is planning everything, but I'd love for you to come. My heart leapt. Of course, sweetheart, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I spent the next few days preparing, baking cookies, knitting a new blanket, wrapping a small gift for the baby. I tucked the DNA kit into my purse, my heart pounding with every step. The day of the party, I dressed carefully, choosing a soft blue dress and a string of pearls Tom had given me on our anniversary. I arrived early, hopping for a moment alone with Daniel, but the house was already full. Julia's family, friends from church, neighbors, coworkers. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and perfume, the sound of laughter and music. I found Daniel in the kitchen, holding the baby, his face lit with pride and love. Mom, meet your grandson, he said, his voice trembling. I reached for the baby, my hands shaking, my heart full. But before I could touch him, Julia stepped between us, her smile tight. Let's wait until after the cake, Anna. He's just settled down. I nodded, forcing a smile, my heart breaking. I spent the party on the sidelines, watching as Julia's mother passed the baby from guest to guest, as Daniel hovered nearby, as Julia smiled and laughed and posed for photos. I waited for my chance, my hands trembling, the DNA kit heavy in my purse. After the cake, as the guests began to leave, I found Daniel in the nursery, changing the baby's diaper. Can I help? I asked, my voice soft. He smiled, relief in his eyes. Of course, Mom, I could use a hand. I handed him a clean onesie, my heart pounding. As he dressed the baby, I gently swabbed the inside of the baby's cheek, slipping the sample into my purse. Daniel didn't notice, too focused on the baby, too tired to question my help. That night, I mailed the samples, my hands shaking, my heart heavy with hope and fear. I realized then that sometimes the hardest thing you can do is search for the truth. And sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let your family live a lie. The days after the party were some of the longest of my life. Every morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach, wondering if today would be the day the results arrived. I tried to keep myself busy, baking bread, tending the garden, calling Ruth for long, rambling conversations about everything except what was really on my mind. But the waiting gnawed at me. I found myself jumping every time the phone rang, checking the mailbox 3 times a day, lying awake at night replaying every moment from the party. I thought about the way Julia had looked at me, the way she'd kept the baby just out of reach, the way Daniel had smiled at his son, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Ruth was my lifeline. She called every evening, her voice a steady comfort. "Any news?" she asked, her tone gentle. "Not yet," I'd reply, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "You're brave, Anna. No matter what happens, you did the right thing." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I just want Daniel to be happy. I just want the truth." One afternoon, as I was weeding the garden, the mail carrier stopped at the gate, a thick envelope in his hand. "Special delivery for you, Mrs. Carter," he said, his eyes kind. I took the envelope, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. I thanked him, then hurried inside, closing the door behind me. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope heavy in my lap. I stared at it for a long time, afraid to open it, afraid of what I might find. I thought about Daniel, about the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and wild stories, about the man he'd become, about the family he'd built. I thought about Julia, about the walls she'd built around herself, about the secrets she was keeping, about the pain she must be carrying. Finally, I took a deep breath and opened the envelope. The results were clear. The baby was not Daniel. I sat at the kitchen table, the DNA results spread out in front of me, my hands trembling. The words on the page blurred as tears filled my eyes. I felt a strange mix of vindication and heartbreak, relief that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right, and sorrow for the family I knew was about to shatter. I called Ruth, my voice barely more than a whisper. "It's not Daniel. Ruth, the baby isn't his." She was silent for a long moment, then said, "Oh, Anna, I'm so sorry." "What are you going to do?" I wiped my eyes, my resolve hardening. I have to tell him. He deserves to know the truth. That night, I invited Daniel over for dinner. I cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden. I set the table with the good china, lit candles, tried to create a sense of normalcy in a world that was about to turn upside down. He arrived just after sunset, his face tired, his eyes full of worry. "Is everything all right, Mom?" he asked, hugging me. I nodded, forcing a smile. "We need to talk, Daniel. There's something you need to know." We sat at the table, the DNA results between us. I told him everything, about the party, about Julia's distance, about my suspicions, about the test. At first, he was angry. "How could you do this without telling me? How could you go behind my back?" I reached for his hand, my voice trembling. "Because I love you, Daniel. Because I couldn't stand to see you living a lie." He pulled his hand away, his eyes filling with tears. "I trusted her. I trusted you." I nodded, my own tears falling. "I know I'm sorry, but you deserve the truth." He stared at the results, his face crumpling. "It's not mine. The baby isn't mine." I hugged him, holding him as he cried, as his world fell apart. The next day, Daniel confronted Julia. I wasn't there, but he called me afterwards, his voice hollow. "She admitted it, Mom. She said she didn't know who the father was. She said she was sorry." I listened, my heart breaking for him, for the baby, for the family we'd lost. "What are you going to do?" I asked gently. He was silent for a long time. "I don't know, but I can't stay with her. I can't raise a child that isn't mine, not after all the lies." The news spread quickly through the family, through the church, through the community. Some people were sympathetic, others judgmental, a few quietly triumphant. I tried to shield Daniel from the worst of it, to remind him that he was loved, that he was not alone. Ruth and I took turns staying with him, cooking meals, cleaning the house, helping with the paperwork for the divorce. Lily was confused, her world turned upside down, but she clung to me, her trust in me unshaken. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel turned to me, his eyes red. "Thank you, Mom, for believing in me, for fighting for me, for loving me even when I didn't want to hear the truth." I hugged him, my heart full. That's what mothers do, Daniel. We love even when it hurts. The weeks after the truth came out were some of the hardest our family had ever faced. Daniel moved back in with me for a while, his spirit bruised, his confidence shaken. He spent long hours walking the fields behind the house, sometimes coming home with wildflowers for Lily, sometimes with nothing but silence and a faraway look in his eyes. Julia moved in with her mother, taking the baby with her. The house she and Daniel had shared sat empty, the nursery untouched, the walls echoing with memories of a future that would never be. The community was divided. Some people blamed Julia, others whispered about Daniel. A few even blamed me for stirring up trouble. I tried not to listen, but the words stung all the same. Ruth was my anchor. She came by every day, bringing food, laughter, and the kind of comfort only a sister can give. We sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. She reminded me that healing takes time, that forgiveness is a process, that love is sometimes the only thing that can hold a family together when everything else falls apart. Lily was the light in our darkness. She asked questions, hard ones, honest ones, but she never stopped loving her father, never stopped trusting me. We created new routines, movie nights with popcorn, Saturday morning pancakes, long walks in the park with Daisy. I watched her grow braver, kinder, more resilient, and I knew I was doing something right. Daniel started seeing a counselor, working through the pain, the anger, the betrayal. He joined a support group for fathers, found solace in the stories of other men who had lost children, lost marriages, lost themselves. Slowly, he began to heal. He started talking about the future again, about going back to school, about finding a new job, about building a new life. One Sunday, after church, Daniel stood up in front of the congregation, his voice steady, his eyes clear. "I want to thank everyone who stood by me, who believed in me, who loved me even when I couldn't love myself. I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong person, but I'm learning to forgive, to move on, to start over." The congregation applauded, their support a balm to his wounded heart. Julia eventually reached out, asking for forgiveness, asking for a chance to explain. Daniel listened, his heart open but cautious. He forgave her, but he didn't go back. He knew he deserved better, knew he needed to build a life based on truth, not lies. As the months passed, the pain faded. The anger softened. The house felt like home again. Daniel laughed more, played more, started to believe that life could be good again. I realized then that I was still here. I was still standing, and I was ready to begin again. Sometimes, the people we love most are the ones who test our strength the hardest. I never imagined that the joy of a new grandchild would turn into the heartbreak of a family secret, or that the truth would come to light because I refused to be shut out. But life has a way of showing us who we are when everything we've built is threatened. If you've ever been pushed aside in your own family, or if you've ever had to fight for the truth when everyone else wanted to keep the peace, I hope you know you're not alone. I know what it's like to sit in the quiet after everyone's gone, to wonder if you did enough, if you loved enough, if you mattered enough. I know what it's like to feel the ache of old wounds and the hope of new beginnings, to want to hold on and let go at the same time. But I also know that healing is possible. That courage is a choice you make every day, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in ways that change everything. I know that you can lose your place and still find your voice, that you can be broken and still be whole, that you can be pushed out and still come back stronger. Would you have brought the DNA test, or kept pretending for the sake of peace? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story, because sometimes sharing our pain is the first step toward healing. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. Your support means more than you know. Thank you for listening and for being part of this family. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, even after the deepest heartbreak, you can still choose to begin again. And if you want to see what happens when a woman finally chooses herself, or if you believe in the power of second chances, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because the next story might just be the one you need.